All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're revealing the core themes behind Joseph Atinsky's profound journey in his book, Out of the Mess. This isn't just another story about enduring hard times. No, it's about the terrifying, beautiful work of what it actually takes to heal after the immediate crisis is over. We're going to map out exactly how he moved from this place of deep, protective isolation to genuine, vulnerable connection. Because look, just functioning after trauma, that is vastly different from actually experiencing freedom. Joseph spent 40 years building up these heavy defense mechanisms. He knew how to perform, he knew how to grind and work, and he absolutely knew how to carry weight. But inside, he was still operating out of this deep underlying sense of abandonment. He survived his past, sure, but as we'll see, that exact survival mindset was the very thing keeping him totally trapped. You can actually see this evolution. His earlier work depicted this solitary figure surrounded by just absolute wreckage and chaos, really capturing that private, isolated pain. But stepping out of that mess, it meant moving into this open landscape, walking hand in hand with his wife, Wendy. It perfectly captures this massive shift from isolation to relationship, from hiding in the mess to becoming whole. And that brings us to a really uncomfortable question. What if you made it out, but your mess followed you? Think about it. When Joseph moved to Texas, married Wendy, and tried to start fresh, he had this jarring realization. A change of scenery doesn't just magically erase your internal programming. The old wounds, they were still speaking loud and clear, just in a brand new environment. So let's look at part 1, the mess we carry. Before you can even begin to heal, you've got to accurately diagnose the condition of your own foundation. And Joseph uses this incredibly striking metaphor of hardpan to describe his heart. If you don't know, hardpan is soil that is so tightly compressed, roots just literally cannot penetrate it. For Joseph, it was years of childhood abuse, rejection, self-protection, just sheer survival. It compressed his emotional foundation into something that looked super stable on the outside. He could function perfectly well in society, right? But emotionally and spiritually, it was basically an impenetrable surface. Nothing new, nothing healthy or intimate could actually take root and grow there. Which brings us to part 2, marriage as a mirror. See, marriage has a funny way of forcing you to look at the things you've successfully hidden from everybody else. Joseph entered his marriage to Wendy carrying, 40 years of brokenness. Suddenly, all his old survival tools, the isolation, the intense self-protection, the performance, they were actively at war with the vulnerability you need for a marital covenant. He was trying to operate a marriage, which absolutely demands intimacy and agreement, but using a survival script built entirely on fear. Naturally, they were constantly colliding over small things, which just exposed this massive lack of foundational trust. He literally had to consciously remind himself, Wendy is not the enemy. And man, like so many of us do, he was projecting decades of brokenness and counterfeit love onto a completely safe, loving relationship. When any conflict popped up, his gut instinct was to instantly build a wall, assume she was judging him, or just spiral into anxiety if she wasn't 100% happy with him. He really had to learn to stop bracing for an attack that just wasn't coming. Moving on to part 3, confronting the father wound. To actually get out of the mess, Joseph had to dig way past the symptoms in his marriage and face the origin of his deepest insecurities. He realized he wasn't seeing his wife, his father, or even God clearly. Why? Because his perception was totally warped by a deep father wound. He described his mindset as looking into a funhouse mirror. The reality was that people were offering him grace, acceptance, and love. But looking through the cracks and ripples of his childhood abandonment, all he saw was judgment, demands, and danger. He was so terrified of needing a father figure that he just pushed away anyone who even tried to step into that role. But then we hit this incredible turning point during a men's retreat, which you can see captured here in this raw, handwritten apology to his dad right in his journal. For years, he'd focused purely on how his father had failed him. But in this inventory, he stops blaming others. He takes full responsibility for his own emotional walls. He actually confesses to his father, I kept love from you. I never let you be my father. I closed my heart. It's powerful. And this led to a pretty staggering realization. You wanted a son, but I performed for you. Joseph recognized that he simply didn't know how to rest in love. He only knew how to try and earn it through performance. He had been treating both his earthly father and God like employers he needed to impress, rather than fathers he could just belong to. That perfectly sets up part 4, learning to be a son. Because here's the thing. Healing doesn't happen in isolation. Joseph couldn't fix himself by himself. He surrendered to a very specific discipleship pathway at Powerhouse Church. By fully submitting to this structured process, being won over, connecting, undergoing real discipleship, and finally being sent out, he allowed himself to be guided by a community. He yielded to capable mentors. And crucially, they didn't just flatter him, they told him the truth. That created the healthy environment he so desperately needed to rebuild his identity. During his time at Jordan Ranch and in recovery groups, he had to systematically unlearn some really destructive habits. We're talking isolation, anger, fear, false faith, avoiding intimacy, self-reliance. He literally wrote them down just to cross them out. He realized that things like extreme self-reliance weren't just quirky personality traits. They were hardcore defense mechanisms stemming directly from his trauma. Unmet needs lead to these unwanted behaviors, and the only way to stop the behavior is to drag that root pain right out into the light. This required a massive, foundational shift in focus, going from what should I do to who am I? Joseph had to stop obsessing over finding a job or chasing some ministry purpose or trying to prove his worth through what he could do. Instead, he had to just accept his identity as an adopted son. Doing things feels productive, right? But identity feels vulnerable. God wasn't interested in polishing his resume. God was interested in making him whole. His wife, Wendy, actually wrote him a letter during one of his retreats, and it perfectly sums up this massive internal transformation. She said, "Be the son and let him be the father." Wow. It was just this beautiful invitation to stop striving, to stop trying to micromanage and control every outcome, and to finally just allow himself to be caught and held by a love that he didn't have to earn. Which leads us to our final section, part 5, filled to be poured out. So what's the end goal of stepping out of the mess? It's not just personal comfort. To really grasp this freedom, look at how Joseph described his old mindset. He said he was carrying past mistakes around like a dead carcass pumped with formaldehyde. Yikes, right? But it's true. He used to drag his past into literally every room, clutching it tight, letting it define his worth. He was keeping his failures artificially alive through shame. It wasn't until he finally, permanently buried that carcass that he was free to step into his actual calling. Once that heavy baggage was in the ground, completely new foundations could take root. This new reality is perfectly captured by his new endeavor with Wendy, which is rooted in inspiration, wellness, and rest. Notice this wasn't built on the compacted hard pan of his past. It was built on the freshly cultivated, healthy soil of his healed identity. Ultimately, this whole journey was never about achieving some flawless, picture-perfect life. It was about becoming a healed vessel that's actually ready to serve. Because vessels are not filled to stay full. They are filled to be poured out. All of that pouring in, the discipleship, the marriage covenant, the tough accountability, healing that deep father wound, it was never meant to just sit stagnant. The whole purpose of becoming whole is so that you can pour that wholeness back out into a broken world, transforming lives that transform the world. So, I want you to take a look at your own life for a second. Are you still dragging around the mess of your past, using it as some kind of twisted evidence to disqualify yourself? Or are you finally ready to do the hard, vulnerable work of healing so that you can be poured out for a greater purpose? Take a hard look at the foundation you're building on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.